Hello, and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. America's high school seniors are falling behind. The decline in math and reading scores is more than a statistic. It's a warning sign about our future. If the next generation is leaving high school and stepping into adulthood with fewer core educational skills than the generation before, where does that leave them as they try to compete at colleges and universities and in the workforce? And where does that leave the nation when it comes to our global competitiveness? Here to dig into the nation's report card is Martin West, academic dean at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thanks for joining me, Martin.
It's great to be with you, Dana.
The downward trend in students' test scores may have been exacerbated by the pandemic, but the latest student assessments show that core learning was in decline prior to 2020. What do you see as the most significant underlying factor that's led to the decline?
Well, I should say that the scores you're referring to come from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, often known as the nation's report card. And they're the only source of data on achievement that we have that's nationally representative and comparable over time. And you're right that despite all the attention that we've been paying to pandemic learning loss, that as we look at the pattern of results, we see that things have actually been moving in the wrong direction since the early part of the last decade. So around 2009 in 12th grade reading, around 2015 in 12th grade math, and other grades and subjects, it peaks in 2013 or 2015 or 2017. But things were headed in the wrong direction prior to the pandemic. And so we need to be looking for factors that are pervasive across subjects that emerged around that time, and that might have particularly adverse consequences for low-scoring students, because that's where we've seen the greatest declines. Now, I should say the nation's report card is designed to tell us what's happening to student achievement, not why. But as I look at all those factors, as well as the fact that achievement appears to be declining in other industrialized countries as well, I think we need to pay serious attention to the emergence of smartphones, the heavy use of screens in schools, and the advent of social media targeting youth as something that could really be playing a role in distracting students from the learning process.
I was going to ask you about that, about the role of technology here. Do you think an over-reliance on tech tools in learning is a contributing factor in declining reading and math scores?
Well, we don't know for sure. We don't know whether it is the use of technology outside of school, smartphones, and just a distraction from learning. I think we do need to be asking the question of whether the pervasive use of screens as a delivery mechanism for instruction now is a part of the problem as well. Google Classroom launched in 2014, and now you find virtually all of K-12 education being conducted in part, sometimes in large part, via those types of online learning management systems. And that can make it particularly hard for students to get away from the distraction of technology if they have to be on their device in order to complete their work. So I think you're asking the right questions.
Girls' scores are declining faster than boys. Is it clear what factors are contributing to the imbalance here?
I don't think we know for sure, but we also know that girls have been more adversely impacted by social media in terms of their anxiety and depression, mental health challenges. And so it could be yet another indicator that technology is something we really need to be looking at.
One thing that stood out to me were the rising graduation rates and the role they play in these declining numbers. Is it unsurprising to see test scores go down the way they have as the overall percentage of students who graduate goes up?
I think if you're looking at results on the nation's report card over the very long term, the high school test started in the 1990s, and we have seen very substantial improvements in graduation rates over that time. And you're right that the expansion of the test-taking population, those who are in school in their senior year, could lead to lower scores in that mechanical way. But when we think about what's happened over the past decade, there really hasn't been a substantial change in the population of students who are enrolled in school in their 12th grade year. And so I think we have evidence of real decline in learning and students' knowledge and skills rather than just a changing of the population.
President Donald Trump's education secretary, Linda McMahon, believes these are issues to be solved at the state level. Should the onus be on states to figure this out?
Well, I don't think these results can speak to those broad questions of education governance. What they tell us is that someone needs to be working hard. An elected official at some level needs to be taking responsibility. And I've been, frankly, a bit disappointed by the lack of urgency here in my own state of Massachusetts, but also around the country in addressing this now longstanding pattern. I think there has been over time a shift away from a strategy of reform that was producing results for American students, and that was test based accountability. It was elected officials of both parties coming together, establishing common standards for what students should know and be able to do, and then holding schools accountable for whether students were demonstrating that knowledge on state tests. And there's been a softening of accountability over the past decade that I think could be helping us understand why we're not seeing schools respond to these challenges that they're facing in the way we'd like them to.
Is it clear whether Education Department budget cuts have impacted the ability of the National Center for Education Statistics to carry out student assessments?
So the NAEP program, absolutely not. In fact, these results were collected and largely analyzed prior to President Trump entering office. And so certainly they were entirely unaffected by any changes at NCES. I can also say that planning and preparations for the 2026 Nations Report Card will be gathering new data on fourth and eighth graders in math and reading, both for the nation and for every state. That's our largest regular data collection, and we are well on track to be able to execute our congressional mandate.
As we've discussed, the decline in students' test scores started before the school closures that began in 2020. Still, is anyone arguing those shutdowns didn't exacerbate the decline? And 5 years on, what lessons have we learned?
Well, I think it is absolutely the case that we know that school closures exacerbated the decline. That's particularly the case in math, where you see a real break in the trend around a pandemic, very steep losses in achievement. But you also see some evidence for that in reading as well. We also know from research conducted beyond the National Assessment of Educational Progress, comparing places where schools reopened more quickly, that the closures were, in fact, a hindrance to student learning. So I think the biggest lesson is in a future calamity, right? Like the pandemic, we need to do everything possible in order to keep students in buildings learning in the natural environment.
And how can schools better support students who are currently struggling academically so they don't fall further behind?
One of the important things they could do is make sure that those students are in school. We know that the losses during the pandemic, a lot of that was due to missed instructional time. And that has continued to some degree because we've seen this huge increase in chronic absenteeism. That is the share of students who are missing as much as 10% or more of instructional days. And that continues to be a challenge, holding back learning recovery and preventing us from addressing those longer term trends. So I think that means really partnering with parents on the part of school leaders to make sure that they understand the importance of their child being present in school and making that a priority.
If student knowledge in core subjects continues to go down, what might be the long-term consequences for the U.S. in terms of both our global competitiveness and our role as a leading democracy?
Well, we know that the knowledge and skills measured by the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and similar tests is a strong leading indicator of the future economic success of individuals who participate, as well as at the aggregate level of the states and nations in which they live. So it's hard to talk about the future, but if past patterns hold, then we would expect the types of results that we're seeing on the national assessment to hold back the American economy in the future and to reduce our global influence over time.
Marty, I also want to note the report shows eighth grade science scores have dropped 4 points since 2019. There's also a widening gap between high performing and low performing students. The $1 million question is, how do we, at a foundational level, begin to fix this problem?
Yes, you're correct. The declines are pervasive across all subjects. We see them in science in the latest results. We've also seen them in recent years in US history and civics, as well as in the core subjects of reading and math. I think the answer to your question about what to do starts with taking the data seriously, using it as an urgent call for action, and beginning to try to rebuild the focus on results that I think drove periods of progress in the past. From around the mid 1990s through around 2010, the nation's report card documented consistent progress across subject areas that was driven by faster gains by our lowest scoring students. So, precisely the opposite of the pattern that you correctly noted we're seeing right now, declines driven by especially large losses among our lowest scoring students. And so we need to perhaps take a lesson from the past and recommit to those strategies that worked.
Really appreciate you sharing your insights here. Thanks for being on the Excerpt, Martin.
It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.